You're watching the movie everyone says is the best of the year, the one with the twist you've been told not to spoil for yourself. And 12 minutes in, your thumb is already drifting toward your phone. Not because the movie is boring, because nothing lately, not even a good story, lands the way it used to. Maybe for you, it isn't a movie at all. Maybe it's standing in front of an open fridge for the fifth time in an evening. Not because you're hungry, but because you're hunting for some small hit of something. Or 20 minutes lost scrolling a streaming menu, unable to settle on anything, because nothing on the list feels like quite enough to actually commit to. You remember being a kid on a Saturday afternoon, completely lost in something small, building a fort out of couch cushions, reading the same comic for the fourth time and still feeling that warm little spark in your chest. The kind that didn't need anything bigger to feel like enough. Now you finish a 40-minute episode and feel nothing. Flat. Already reaching for the next thing before this one has even settled in your body. If this is you, I need you to hear this clearly. Your dopamine system isn't broken because something is wrong with you. It's behaving exactly the way it was trained to behave after years of being shaped by a screen that knows precisely how to spike it. This isn't about discipline you're lacking or some flaw in your character. It's chemistry, responding exactly the way chemistry is supposed to respond. And in the next few minutes, I want to show you what's actually happening inside your brain and the small, quiet shifts that brought my own sense of wonder back online. Hi, I'm really glad you're here. If any of that felt a little too familiar, please know you're not alone, and you're definitely not lazy or broken. This is a quiet corner for nervous system regulation, attention, and living a little softer in a world that profits from keeping you a little too wired. Nothing here is about willpower or discipline. It's about understanding the machinery well enough to gently work with it instead of against it. If you want extra support along the way, I've put together a free nervous system guide and a weekly newsletter called Aligned, where I go deeper into things like this. The link is down in the description if you'd like it. Okay, let's talk about what scrolling actually does to your dopamine. Because once you understand the mechanism, everything else starts to make a lot more sense. Here's the part most people don't know. Dopamine isn't really the pleasure chemical the way we've been told. It's closer to the wanting chemical. It rises in anticipation of a reward, more than in the having of it. That's part of why scrolling feels endless. Your brain gets a tiny dopamine rise with every swipe before you even see what's on the next screen, because it's the not knowing that lights it up. Psychiatrist Anna Lemke, who studies addiction and wrote the book Dopamine Nation, describes the brain as running on something like a seesaw between pleasure and pain. Every time we get a spike of dopamine, a notification, a like, one more swipe down an endless feed, the brain works afterward to bring itself back to balance, and it tends to overcorrect, tilting slightly toward the pain side, a little flatter, a little more restless, a little less able to enjoy quiet, ordinary things. Do that enough times for long enough, and your baseline dopamine doesn't just dip for a moment, it resets lower. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has spoken about how frequent, high-intensity dopamine spikes, the kind that short videos and constant notifications are built to deliver, can blunt that baseline so thoroughly that slower pleasures stop registering as pleasurable at all. And this isn't only a brain chemistry story, it's a nervous system story too. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory describes how our nervous system is constantly scanning, completely outside our awareness, for cues of safety or threat. A phone that buzzes unpredictably, that demands little bursts of attention all day, keeps that system in a low simmer of alertness, never quite settling into the calm, connected state where slower pleasures, a book, a meal, a real conversation, actually have room to land. So when a movie feels boring, or a hobby feels pointless, or a quiet evening feels almost unbearable to sit through, that isn't a character flaw. That's a dopamine baseline that's been pulled down, and a nervous system that's forgotten what settled even feels like. I lived in that flatness for longer than I want to admit. Somewhere along the way, I noticed that anything slow had started to feel almost physically uncomfortable to sit through. A quiet film, a long chapter, a conversation with no punchline. Not because those things had changed, because some part of my brain had quietly recalibrated to expect a hit far sooner than that and was getting restless waiting for one. What eventually moved me out of it wasn't more willpower or another productivity hack. It was a handful of small subtractions. Here's what I actually changed. The first thing I did was stop feeding the variable reward loop. For a long time, my reflex during any gap, waiting for the kettle, waiting for a reply, was to pull down on a feed and let randomness decide what I'd see next. It always felt like I was choosing entertainment. I wasn't. I was feeding an uncertainty machine, and every refresh was quietly training my brain to want the next swipe more than it wanted whatever was already in front of me. It clicked for me one evening when I caught myself refreshing a feed during a phone call with someone I love. Not because I cared what was on it, but because my thumb had simply learned the motion. I actually stopped mid-sentence and looked down at my own hand like it belonged to someone else. That's when I understood this had nothing to do with curiosity. It was conditioning. The unpredictability wasn't a feature I was enjoying. It was the exact mechanism keeping my baseline low. These days, instead of opening algorithmic feeds during small gaps, I choose something specific, a particular show, a particular person to text, a particular song, so there's no slot machine involved at all. No spin, no surprise, just a choice I already made on purpose. It felt strange at first, almost too plain, like I was denying myself something, but the plainness was exactly the point. What I noticed, almost immediately, was that my nervous system stopped doing that low-level scanning in the in-between moments. There was nothing to wait on, nothing uncertain to brace for, just a small, settled pause, the kind I hadn't realized I'd lost. The second thing I changed was protecting the first dopamine hit of my day. I used to reach for my phone before my eyes were even fully open and scroll while still lying down. That first hit of stimulation, before I'd even stood up, was setting the tone for everything that followed. I was anchoring my whole day's baseline to a screen. It took me embarrassingly long to connect this properly, but whatever gives you that first real spike of stimulation in the morning seems to become the benchmark your brain measures everything else against for the rest of the day. If that benchmark is a screen, ordinary things later on, a walk, a conversation, a slow breakfast, will always feel like they're competing with something louder. Mornings work differently for me now. My phone stays in another room for the first half hour or so. I step outside if I can, even just onto a balcony or a doorstep. I let actual daylight hit my eyes, stretch a little, sit with something warm to drink before I look at a single notification. Some mornings that's all it is. Just light and quiet and my own breath. Nothing impressive about it at all. It sounds almost too small to matter, but it changes the whole shape of the day. My nervous system gets to wake up at its own pace, instead of being yanked into alertness, and that calmer entry point seems to carry through for hours, sometimes well into the evening. The third thing I changed was learning to sit in the gap. Any sliver of boredom used to send my hand straight to my pocket. A red light, an ad break, the 30 seconds before a meeting started. I never let a single unfilled moment exist if I could help it. I started noticing something almost funny about my own behavior once I paid attention to it. I had been treating boredom like an emergency when really it was just rest. By filling every gap, I was never giving my dopamine system a chance to recover its baseline, the same way a muscle never gets stronger if it's never allowed to rest between uses. That itchy, restless feeling when nothing is happening isn't danger. It's closer to a kind of detox. These days, I deliberately let a few minutes of boredom exist, untouched most days, standing in a queue, waiting for water to boil, sitting on a train without earphones in, even sitting at a red light without glancing down at my lap. I just let it be uneventful and let myself feel the itch without scratching it. The first few times it was genuinely uncomfortable, almost embarrassingly so for something this small. But each time I didn't reach for relief, my nervous system seemed to register, slowly, that understimulation isn't a threat. That low simmer of alertness I mentioned earlier started to quiet down simply because I stopped giving it constant little sparks to react to. The fourth thing I changed was stopping the stacking of pleasures. I used to eat while scrolling, watch a show while scrolling something else on a second screen, listen to a podcast while also half reading something. I thought I was multitasking efficiently. What I was actually doing was stacking multiple dopamine sources on top of each other all the time, so that no single source ever felt like quite enough on its own. What an honest little experiment showed me was uncomfortable. I tried just once to eat a single meal without anything else going on. I found I genuinely couldn't focus on the taste of the food for more than a few seconds at a time. That unsettled me more than I expected. It meant my baseline had drifted so far that one ordinary pleasure, food, couldn't hold my attention by itself anymore. So one pleasure gets to be one pleasure now, as a rule. Eating without a screen, watching something without my phone in my other hand, a walk without anything playing in my ears, at least some of the time. None of it dramatic. Just a quiet insistence on giving one thing my full attention. What came back, slowly, was the actual texture of things. Food started tasting like food again, in a way I genuinely hadn't noticed I'd lost. A scene in a film could land emotionally instead of sliding past while my attention was split three ways. My nervous system, it turns out, can only really settle into one stream of input at a time. And giving it that one stream, fully, is what let quieter joys start registering again. The fifth thing I changed was trading fast spikes for slow builds. Almost everything I leaned on for enjoyment used to be quick. A video, a scroll, a notification. All of it delivered its hit of dopamine in seconds, and all of it crashed just as fast, leaving me a little flatter than before. What I came to understand was that pleasure itself wasn't the problem. The speed and intensity of it was. Slow build activities. Cooking something properly, learning a few chords on an instrument, tending a plant, a long walk with no destination, release dopamine far more gradually, and they don't punish your baseline afterward the way a fast spike does. I remember finishing a jigsaw puzzle that had sat half done on my table for almost a month. 3 quiet evenings of just fitting pieces together, no urgency at all. The satisfaction afterward had a completely different texture to it than anything a screen had given me in years. Now I protect a little unhurried time most weeks for something with no urgency to it at all. Nothing to finish quickly, nothing measuring my progress. Some weeks it's 20 minutes, some weeks it's an hour. The amount matters less than the kind. My nervous system responds to this completely differently than it does to a feed. There's no crash afterward, no flatness, just a steady, settled kind of satisfaction that actually stays with me for the rest of the day, sometimes even into the next one. Here's what I quietly got back. Over the months this all unfolded. Silence stopped being unbearable. I can sit in a quiet room now without immediately reaching for noise to fill it. A slow Sunday afternoon, the kind that used to feel like dead time, now feels almost spacious. Food has flavor again, properly, the way it did when I was younger and wasn't eating in front of a screen. A good meal can hold my attention from the first bite to the last without my mind drifting toward my phone halfway through. Conversations got longer, too, in a way I didn't expect. I noticed I was actually listening to the end of what someone was saying instead of half formulating a reply while some part of me was already wondering what notification might be waiting. I noticed it outdoors, too. Walking somewhere without reaching for my phone, I started actually seeing things again. The particular way light fell across a wall in the late afternoon, a stranger's dog doing something silly, a tree I must have walked past 100 times without once really looking at it. Sleep changed as well, though I didn't expect it to. Falling asleep used to mean lying in bed scrolling until my eyes physically couldn't stay open anymore. Now there's an actual wind down. a gap between the day ending and sleep beginning, and I fall asleep faster and more easily than I have in years. Stories land the way they're supposed to. I finished a film recently, the kind with a quiet, slow burn ending, the kind that would have made me restless a year ago, and felt the full weight of it settle in my chest instead of sliding past while I half watched with a phone in my hand. And that movie from the beginning of this video, I went back to it weeks later, phone in another room entirely. The twist landed exactly the way it was meant to. Not because the film changed, because I had quietly, patiently given my own dopamine system room to recover enough to feel it. None of this came from adding another app, another supplement, another hack promising to fix my focus. It came from subtracting the things that were quietly keeping my baseline low in the first place. Less stacking, less unpredictability, less constant stimulation, and underneath all of that, more room for things to actually feel like something again. That's really the whole philosophy this channel rests on, if I'm honest. We're so used to being told that fixing ourselves means adding something new, another routine, another app, another 5-step system. Sometimes the more honest, more uncomfortable answer is that healing looks like taking things away and then simply waiting, patiently, for your own baseline to find its way back to where it's supposed to be. It's a slower kind of fix than anything sold to us, and it doesn't make for a flashy before and after. But it's the only version of this that's actually held up for me week after week. If even one of these resonated with you, I'd love to know which one in the comments. It genuinely helps me know what to make more of. If this was helpful, a thumbs up goes a long way for this little channel. And if you want to keep going deeper into this with me, I've got another video that might be exactly what you need to watch next. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.